Good evening, friends, and welcome to Sleepy Time Tales, a podcast aimed at helping you to get a good night's sleep. Do you find your mind troubled with the stresses of modern life, especially when the lights are out and you're trying to get a restful night? Does your spinning mind keep you awake? Follow my voice down the path towards a good night's rest. Listen to me tell a story that will keep your mind from wandering to your daytime problems, the ones you can't solve right now and will be easier to solve while rested. Listen to my voice and allow yourself to drift, following the twists and turns of the story, but slowly letting go and drifting into sleep. Let my voice wash over you at a comfortable volume and allow yourself to be distracted from the stresses and worries that play on your mind. Whether you need help falling asleep or going back to sleep in the middle of the night, you can trust me to keep you company and help you to wake up tomorrow in a rested state. You may need to try out Sleepy Time Tales for a few nights to get used to this slightly strange idea, but I believe it will be well worth your while. I'm here to work with you, to create a safe space, a cocoon in which you can curl up and allow nature to take its course. So settle down, relax, and allow yourself to get lost in my telling of tonight's story. Before we get to tonight's reading, I'd like to ask for a few minutes of your time. Sleepy Time Tales is a purely listener-supported podcast. I can only keep it going, paying for the services and tools that I use, and justify my time thanks to the generosity of listeners like you. So if you're finding Sleepy Time Tales useful, if it helps you to get a restful night, and you would like to keep it going out to thousands of other insomniacs, please consider supporting on the Patreon at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. This is monthly support that helps me keep the lights on and can also get you fun bonuses based on your contribution level. One fun bonus that I'm going to be throwing in the feed for all patrons is this is actually the last reading of Old Glass and How to Collect It that I'm going to be doing. I've reached the end of the main guide and the rest of it is just a long list. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to compile all of the readings that I've done into one single download for patrons of all levels. So if that sounds fun to you and you've been interested in checking out the Patreon, now's the time. But of course, as I always say, if monthly support is a big ask, which I completely understand, you can make once-off tips to the tip jar on the website. And if you'd like to help Sleepy Time Tales without having to do so financially, it's even just as helpful to tell people about it. That's enough of that. Let's get to learning about fake glass. We return this week to Old Glass and How to Collect It by J. Sidney Lewis. Chapter 8, Frauds and Imitations. Presumably, as long as there is a demand for old glass, there will be found persons sufficiently unscrupulous to attempt to eke out the very limited supply of the genuine article by imposing upon the credulity or ignorance of collectors and supplying them, greatly to the vendor's advantage, with more or less colorable imitations of what they desire. I have in a previous chapter dealt with certain experiences of my own with regards to fiat glasses. That, however, was only by the way. The subject of frauds and imitations in Old English glass is of quite sufficient importance to warrant a chapter to itself. There is probably no department of the antiques beloved of the collector in which there is so much room for fraud as in Old English glass. And there is certainly none in which imitation has been carried to a finer point. One can hardly blame the manufacturer for this. The demand for old glass is much larger than the supply, and the collector, who is desirous of nothing so much as to complete his set, is insistent in his inquiries. But the trouble comes when a reproduction, altogether admirable in itself, is passed off for the thing it is not. A genuine specimen of the early glassworker's art, bearing a value proportioned to its antiquity and presumed rarity. I saw, not long ago, in a silversmith's in the south of England, a great number of specimens set out for sale as genuine old glass, at a price corresponding to their supposed value. But every piece, without exception, belonged to what a connoisseur would term the bad age, i.e., anything from the year 1850 onwards. The dealers must have known its period and its worth, or rather its worthlessness, and yet they allowed it to be sold as the real thing. Unfortunately, this is no uncommon occurrence, and it is a pity that the practice cannot be checked. The ordinary trader is not permitted to sell margarine as butter, or the publican manufactured spirit as pure grape brandy. But the dealer in antiques seems to claim a special license to impose upon the unwary, and may with impunity, or at least often does, pass off as rare specimens of ancient craftsmen's work things, which to the seeing eye are obvious and clumsy frauds, and virtually worthless. Nor is the large dealer the only culprit. Small second-hand shops teem with faked antiques, and many of these, and also certain pawn shops, make a great profit of their unwary and unskilled hunter for bargains in glass, china, engravings, sporting prints, and all the other objects that tempt a collector's eye. Figure 14 illustrates a common type of such bargains. These pieces were procured at a pawnbroker's establishment in South London. They are obviously imitations of early Georgian salt cellars, but they were offered to the author as genuine old Waterford sweetmeat dishes, and then as, perhaps, salt cellars, and finally as old glass ice cups, at a price dwindling from 31 shillings 6pence through 25 shillings to 15 shillings, at which I purchased them as awful examples of the fate that awaits the collector who goes bargain hunting in antiques with an enthusiasm greater than his knowledge. It is difficult to lay down any hard and fast rule by which to test the genuineness of specimens discovered in this haphazard way. Possibly the best is the color test. Does it look right in color? Not too green and not too steely? For crafty imitators often tend to overdo these qualities. Does it bear too evident signs of age? One has heard of chips and hair scratches artificially produced in order to give it that appearance of advanced age, which is so grateful to the eye of the collector and the pocket of the vendor. Your best plan is not to jump at once, but to take a piece of good glass with you by which to test the find and compare the two as to color, sharpness of cutting and design, and so on. With caution, you may expect now and again to pick up in this casual way some pieces worthy of your attention, and maybe once or twice a specimen worth its place in any collection. For a good example of glass and china have been known to be pawned for a fraction of their worth, neither the depositor nor the pawnbroker having the slightest inkling of their value. But the shops above all others to be shunned by the picker-up of unconsidered trifles are the shops whose windows scream, by the aid of plastered tickets, of the special bargains to be obtained within. The collector may well abandon hope who enters here. There is probably not a genuine piece in the place. If there is, it occupies a prominent place as a decoy duck, and is generally marked at an absurdly low price. The salesman depending on his knowledge of human nature to foist off something else on the unwary or diffident customer. I have had, on occasion, an unholy joy in entering some such place, and defeating all the efforts of the salesman to divert my attention, carrying off the only decent piece in the place, at a price possibly 50% lower than its intrinsic value. But such pleasures are not for all, nor indeed for many. In actual practice, the would-be purchaser is generally told that the particular specimen is not for sale, that a customer had left it to be valued, that it had been put in the window by mistake, or some other cock-and-bull story. Other places to be shunned are the sham Oriental bazaars, where Eastern jewelry, Japanese ivories, jars, fans, beads, etc. are sold. Many such establishments cater expressly for the unwary and unwise collector. He will find, if his hobby be glass of all kinds and descriptions from Elizabethan downwards, and will be treated with such charming solicitude and deference that he may well become blinded to the fact that the whole stock is counterfeit, and that the whole atmosphere of the place is specially designed to conceal that awkward but essential fact. The cheat is assisted by the delightful courtesy of the saleswoman. But apart from the scores of recognized ways in which this nefarious business of planting frauds on the innocent is carried on, there are many less obvious and consequently more dangerous traps for the unwary. Of these, one only hears from the victims themselves. Thus one, attracted by a specimen in a shop window, may become an interested listener to conversation in which the beauty of said piece and its phenomenal cheapness are the theme. It probably never occurs to the dupe that the respectable-looking lady and gentleman are in the employ of the shopkeeper, and that the conversation was arranged entirely for his benefit. Then comes the great question of sales, private or otherwise. There is the complete clearance owing to the proprietor's death. There is the widow full of miscellaneous stock, including certain good pieces. There is also the notice, nothing sold until the 21st. By the 21st, the few good pieces, having achieved their object, have disappeared. But the crowd they have attracted is there, and is there with the intention of buying, and buys. Again, there is the family compelled by misfortune to realize immediately all its assets, and in so doing to sacrifice everything. Who would not pick up a bargain when to do so is to do a good turn? All such methods are transparent enough if one stops to consider and to analyze, but how seldom one does. A very fine and lucrative trade is carried on in Old Bristol and Nailsea glass, for the reason that in no other kind of glass is it so difficult to distinguish the false from the true. The milky white surface lends itself particularly to imitation. I remember some specimens brought to me by a well-known collector. There were a pair of small bottles, pepper and vinegar, and my visitor was mightily proud of his find and his bargain. But on a careful examination, I fear that he realized, with some sense of discomfiture, that the deceased ancestor who had been dangled before him was something of a myth, and that the specimens were only modern reproductions and probably foreign at that. To my surprise, on visiting a local museum on the West Coast recently, I found the same two pieces exhibited as specimens of early Bristol glass. The best test for this description of glass is carefully to scrutinize the decoration with a strong magnifying glass. The magnification will reveal alike the perfection of the workmanship of the real Old Bristol manufacture and the poverty and roughness of the imitation. Further, Bristol glass is soft to the touch, with a beautiful, smooth body. Often, too, on turning the glass upside down, you find in the center of a clear spot devoid of the opal tint, probably due to the workman running all his color off at this point. The fake will probably, in addition to being rough in texture, be light in weight, and of a milk and watery hue, possibly even with a greyish tinge. The difficulty one has in discriminating between the true and the false in this connection is accentuated by the fact that vast quantities of imitations of old glass have been sent over from Germany and Austria. And although there is every probability that the influx will cease for some time to come, yet there is unfortunately, from the point of view of the amateur collector, already in existence, in England and America, so large a number of specimens of Bristol and Nailsea glass with a strong Teutonic accent, that there is no likelihood of a dearth of it for some years to come. And although much of it bears such obvious traces of its origin that he who runs may read, yet much is so perfectly cut and so similar in appearance to the genuine ware, that the amateur is likely to be deceived. And particularly the amateur who, having learnt the characteristics of this make of glass, look for them in his find. He will certainly discover them, for is it not the business of the astute manufacturer of fakes to see that they are there? His business depends upon his ability to deceive the would-be connoisseur, to whom in this case the possession of a little knowledge is an infinitely dangerous thing. The commonest examples of high-class frauds are dishes, salt cellars, decanters, and preserve jars. All such should be subjected to the most careful examination. If the characteristics you have expected to find are particularly evident, all the more caution is necessary. Even then, you will probably find that you'll have to pay for your experience. For your comfort in misfortune, I may say that I have never yet met a collector who has not, in the beginning, fallen a victim to the wiles of the fake house. And only by the experience so gained, and unfortunately paid for, has he learned to shun the net that is spread, in vain, in the sight of any old bird. But the process is often a lengthy one. My advice is that when any find appears to be doubtful, or worse, appears too good to be true, to take it on approval for a day or so, or purchase it on condition that you receive the full amount paid if the article is returned safe and sound within, say, a week. You will not find it difficult to secure such an agreement. Only get it in writing. If the dealer will not consent and you have made up your mind, take a day to think over it, and then take your risk and buy. If you have made a mistake, you will probably discover it, and you will not repeat it. A friend of mine boasted some years ago that he had never made a bad mistake in judging glass, because he had kept his eyes open, and invariably asked someone who knew to accompany him whenever he thought he had discovered a piece worthy of being added to his collection. But alas, during a summer holiday spent among the Irish lakes, he fell a victim. The lady, who was the vendor, had evidently kissed the Blarney Stone, and as she was moving and the matter was urgent, a price, a tall one, was fixed on the spot. And my friend became the possessor of a remarkably fine collection, which expert examination proved to be entirely of Dutch extraction. And the moral? Well, had he in the beginning relied upon his own judgment, he would have made mistakes, but he would at the same time have acquired first-hand knowledge and have escaped a serious disaster. One often finds replicas of old glass molded, and as molded glass was, of course, the earliest kind, the pieces seem to acquire a spurious value. Molded glass, with its heavy, thick appearance and its rounded edges, lends itself easily to imitation. But the reproductions are often made in common glass, which gives itself away to the touch. One need hardly be an expert to detect common glass by its feel and texture. It must not be assumed that the best method of forming a collection is to pick up those pieces which appear to be cheap. Real old glass, like other genuine antiques, is greatly sought after and commands a highly respectable price. The question of price is really a considerable factor to the amateur collector. His aim should be to get a complete collection, however small, and his danger that of duplicating, simply because he sees a specimen cheap. "Oh, I must have that. I gave nearly twice as much for the one I have," is a sentiment often heard. But the collector must eliminate duplicates, unless he aims at duplicating a set, say a dozen of wine glasses or finger basins. The ultimate fate of duplicates is to be weeded out, often at a price far below what they cost. I remember a case in point, in which a novice found himself, after a brief experience, the owner of so large a collection that his cupboards failed to accommodate it, and he had to have larger ones made. and yet one shelf alone contained 4 barley wine glasses, 5 ordinary air-twisted stem glasses, 3 early English plain wine glasses, 4 early finger basins, and 5 rummers of different shapes, all of the most ordinary type. When by experience he had acquired wisdom, these and similar articles were sent to the sale room. 2 lots did not elicit a single bid, and the remainder went for far less than had been paid for them. Now, however, he possesses a good representative collection, which will be sure to fetch, when under the hammer, a sum which will produce a handsome return upon his expenditure. There is today such a craze for what is old that it is difficult to find anything that is not faked. I often wonder, when dining with friends, if they are aware of the real nature and origin of the glass they use. On the other hand, one finds in some places, particularly old country houses, pieces almost priceless pushed away into corners, as if they were of no value at all. I remember some years ago finding in a village not far from Liverpool an old dame who had passed her life as a housekeeper to a wealthy merchant, using a fine, genuine old Waterford bowl, about 18 inches in diameter, for stewed fruit. The bowl was easily worth from 18 to 20 guineas, while the plates on the table were the commonest procurable. Needless to say, the bowl is no longer in her possession, having been replaced by a substitute of far greater appeal to her. In spite of such occasional finds as this, the amateur who, in pursuit of his hobby, makes a habit of raiding old country cottages, shops and inns, must be exceedingly wary and look upon exceptional discoveries with an exceedingly skeptical eye. An amusing experience that befell a friend of the author's, a foreign glass merchant, is perhaps worth recounting in this connection. Arriving one day at an inn in the south of England, he was surprised to find set out in the place of honour some very inferior specimens of wine glasses, reproductions of an early type which he was easily able to identify as his own manufacture. Entering into conversation with the landlord, he was informed that a distant ancestor of that worthy, soldiering in Ireland, had the fortune to render some signal service to a native of that distressful country, and was given the glass in a token of gratitude. Apart from the appropriateness of the gift, and a certain improbability that articles of such fragility would survive the vicissitudes of a campaign, the landlord proved not only willing, but eager to dispose of his valued heirlooms, at a price unexpectedly moderate for pieces of such antiquity and rarity. The humour of the situation, however, developed when the prospective purchaser produced a pocketbook and read to the astonished landlord the last order his firm had received for 12 imitation antique glasses with twisted stems at 21 shillings a dozen. The difference between this and the 30 shillings apiece which the landlord demanded left a very pretty margin of profit. Old glass is of course so easily imitated that it is hardly surprising there should be many pitfalls in the path of the unwary, and I can only hope that the foregoing remarks may prove of some assistance in preventing my reader from falling a victim to the many specious attempts made for his deception. But it is well, wherever possible, to examine at leisure any piece that may strike the eye, and in the surroundings which it will occupy. Artificial light, too, is a very treacherous medium in which to examine glass of any kind. Any find should be examined by daylight, and side by side with other pieces of whose authenticity there is no doubt. Then, with a little training, he should be able to determine, with a fair degree of accuracy, the genuine specimens from the false, and this in spite of the resources of modern science, which have enabled the faker to copy texture and colour with all but exactitude, and of the skill of the workman, who reproduces faithfully the form and decorations of the original. Chapter 9. Some hints to collectors. Glass collecting is so full of interest that it need not be followed on any large scale. It is equally fascinating when pursued in the humblest fashion, or ransacking old second-hand shops in lowly districts, as well as country cottages. A nucleus is soon formed, and that accomplished, the collector is in the toils of his hobby, and unless he is an utter failure, one of those hopeless and helpless folks who can never learn to discriminate between the true and the false, he speedily acquires a collection which has not only provided him with a delightful recreation, but is a source of considerable pride. Of course, it must not be imagined that anyone can go into a second-hand shop, a marine store dealer's, or a pawn shop, and come out with a bargain every time. Nor do I assert that every piece bought will justify the enthusiasm of the first moments of possession. But I do say that, given reasonable judgment, anyone may form the nucleus of a small collection, and that with decent care in adding to it pieces that are considered rare, genuine, and unusual, the result will be entirely gratifying, yielding a full measure of artistic satisfaction, to say nothing of pecuniary advantage. I need hardly say that the seeker for bargains should not attempt to pursue his object in large West End shops, or their equivalents in provincial cities. Rent, rates, and large salary lists preclude any possibility of cheapness there. And further, if I may venture to let my readers into a secret, there are hundreds of so-called antique dealers in our principal cities, who are as incapable of telling the real antique from the artful fake as the veriest tyro. Their statements about glass in particular are often utterly unreliable. There are good firms to be found who have expert knowledge, and whose judgment may be relied upon, but they are few and far between. The so-called expert antiquary is only too often a victim to his own too alluring imagination. He thinks he knows, good easy man, when in reality fancy is building him a home of romance, into which unluckily he leads his too credulous client. And then the disillusionment, and the confidence in expert opinion vanishes into the realm of things that were. A friend of mine recently purchased a Fiat glass from a large and famous West End house. He was assured that it was genuine, and on that strength of that assurance paid a fair price. Within 3 days he was back, furious at having been deceived. They returned his money. To my own knowledge, that particular firm has had many old wine glasses, engraved with the Fiat decoration and emblems. They are stored in a dark cupboard, and only one is shown at a time. There is little doubt that many collectors have suffered from this insolent piece of trickery. Personally, were I starting to collect glass in a small way, and for any reason preferred not to go out into the highways and byways to gather in what I might find, I would shun the big dealer altogether. I should select a small man whom I had reason to believe scrupulous and clean, a man with a reputation to gain and consequently a business to make. Such a man will generally have had a sound training, will know his subject, and take pleasure in justifying your confidence. The question of price is always a serious one, and it is easy to understand the reluctance of the amateur to inquire the price of a piece which has taken his fancy, knowing as he does that the sum asked may probably be as many guineas as he may be prepared to pay shillings. Yet a price, though high, need not necessarily be excessive. A genuine specimen acquires value in proportion to its rarity, rather than its beauty of design or build. As to genuineness, a decent firm will readily give a guarantee by writing upon the bill something of this nature. We guarantee this article to be genuine old glass, made and decorated, about the year. And in the event of the purchaser wishing to return it within 1 week, we will refund in full the amount paid, provided the article is returned in perfect condition. A short time limit is only fair, as the seller must protect himself against a possible loss of sale. One word as to judging glass. It is not necessary to assume that a glass is old because it rings well. Yet this is a common belief. The clearness with which a glass will ring depends on many things, the most important being its shape. Thus, finger basins, rummers, large glasses, bowls, and preserve jars invariably ring well, whether ancient or modern. The expert will judge by texture, the color peculiar to the variety of glass, the shape and the style of decoration. Even here he may readily be deceived, all these features being reproduced with remarkable fidelity. Only a short time ago, a buyer to a large London firm asked my opinion with regard to a bowl which he had bought as early English glass. To all appearance it was genuine, and yet it was clearly proved to be of Dutch, and very recent Dutch, manufacture. This Dutch glass is imported in large quantities, but the expert eye can readily detect it. The color is a uniform green, a kind of deep-sea tint, and very clear. Moreover, the wear is not nearly so heavy as the genuine Waterford which it resembles, and the facets of the cutting are too perfect and sharp. The muddy-colored glass is also frequently imitated in the Dutch factories. Here again the weight is an important test. It is far lighter than the genuine English product. Even the facial scratches with which age invariably adorns the bases of all glass vessels are imitated by the modern fake merchant. A brief rubbing with pumice stone or rubbing the specimen against a stone will produce the desired effect. The best training for the amateur collector is to spend a few weeks in examining a really good collection. Say that in the British Museum or in the South Kensington Museum. Thus, the eye becomes educated to the color, shape, texture, style of decoration, etc. of the various kinds of glass, and is less likely to be deceived by even the best of modern imitations. Then there is the eternal question of price. One point should be always before the collector's mind. In the event of my being compelled to realize my collection, what price may I hope to get for it? To the collector, the buying price and the selling price are intimately connected. There is so much capital to be locked up, so much time employed, so much skill displayed, and there should be a fair recompense for all three. And further, there is the ever-present risk that fashion may change, and articles once greedily sought after may become unsaleable because they were out of fashion. Of course, one obvious way of purchasing to advantage is when others have to sell at a disadvantage. When the collections come onto the market because of the death or misfortune of their owner. At such sales, I've known many bargains picked up, although it is again necessary to emphasize the need for wariness. Bogus sales are not unknown, and it is a common practice for genuine sales to be salted, and often pretty liberally, by the introduction of inferior imitations, in the hope that, among much that is undoubtedly genuine, they may escape detection. I may perhaps be permitted to say a word as to the prices which should be paid in the ordinary way at such sales. An old Waterford cut-glass jug is, provided its cutting is perfect, certainly worth a £5 note. A very common dodge is to sell an old Waterford jug with a cracked handle, a crack being where it is least likely to show, for instance at the top or bottom of the handle, close to where it joins the body. For an ordinary spiral wine glass, 7 shillings, £6 to 10 shillings is a fair price, but glasses with baluster stems are easily worth a guinea. Most expensive of all are the real fiat glasses. £9, £10, £15, and even more may be paid for one. I saw one sold a few months ago for a record price of 19 guineas. If you come across a fiat glass priced at a £5 note or less, you may be sure of one of two things. Either the owner does not know the value of the piece, or it is an imitation. Baluster stems are not often to be met with, but they may be well worth anything from £1 to 30 shillings. Of course, in considering this question of price, one must not forget that often a fancy price is willingly paid in order to complete a set, or for some other reason. Irish finger glasses with double lip are roughly worth from 5 shillings to 7 shillings sixpence, and sometimes higher prices are given for sets of a dozen, or even half a dozen. Opaque glass is rare, and glasses with opaque twists are worth about 15 shillings apiece. Masonic, thistle, and boot glasses run about 2, 3, and 1 guinea respectively. Salt cellars with the Irish flat cutting cost anything from a guinea each, and vinegar and oil bottles about 30 shillings. I have purposely refrained from mentioning any large or important pieces, though many such perfectly well known to the expert. It is, of course, quite impossible to fix a price for these. As an appendix to this book, I have drawn up a list of prices fetched by important pieces at recent sales. A large Waterford bowl will fetch 25 to 30 guineas, and if its genuineness is incontestable and its artistic merit high, it may well bring twice that figure. Personally, I consider that the high water mark has been reached in the price of ordinary pieces of old glass. There is certainly a great demand for it at the moment, but such crazes are rarely lasting, and the time may come when antique glass, which has largely dispossessed antique silver, will itself fall into disfavor before the onset of some newer fancy. And I'm going to call it there. And the rest of the book is just a very long list of catalogue items being sold at sale, as mentioned at the end there. So this is the end of Old Glass and How to Collect It. I'm going to compile all my readings of this over the year and a bit that I've been reading this into a single episode, and I'm going to put that up on the Patreon for all Patreon supporters at all levels. So if you are a subscriber there, keep an ear out. Or if you'd like to listen to this and get some of the other bonuses, you can go and sign up there at patreon.com/sleepytimetales. Thanks again for joining me on this episode of Sleepy Time Tales, the podcast designed around a bedtime story to help you to get a restful night. New episodes will be released every Sunday night to give you something fresh to help you rest in a new week. But make sure to follow or subscribe in whatever service you use so that you can get your new episodes whenever they come out. Good night, and sweet dreams.